Okay, good morning. This is January the 17th, 2021. It's 10:15 and in the morning, Sunday morning, and thank you for being here with me. Taking a look at the equipment, looks like everything's running just fine. All right, I'm in I'm in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. I'm going to be spending time beyond verse 8 and beyond this morning. But before I get started, let's try to review a little bit about what I've talked about previously in chapter 11, verses 1 through 7. That in this initial section in chapter 11, what we have is we have the description of mutual testimony. That's what he starts out with. The writer begins in Hebrews chapter 11 speaking about the fact that we are testimonies, we are a testimony, that we testify of our God, and that he also is a person who testifies of us. And that through the things that we do in response to the truth that is revealed to us, we exercise this testimony. We present this testimony to others. All right? And that faith is the response to the truth that is revealed. That we need to have a definition of this. It's not just some kind of undefined abstraction, which a lot of people would prefer that it not be well defined. That way they can just call it whatever they want to call it. But I personally try to define things the best I can, and when I think of, when I speak of, when I refer to the idea of faith, that's generally what I'm thinking, is what is going to be our response to the truth that is revealed, that is the manifestation of our faith. And that faith in and of itself is not going to be of much use unless there's some manifestation of that of some kind. James would go so far, he went so far as to say that you have to perform a certain set of well-defined works. I don't see that being the case in the scriptures, but that there simply needs to be a response. All right? That it should be reflected a little bit in the way that we make our decisions, in the way that we think, in the way that we live our lives, but it's not to be evaluated according to a particular set of criteria, usually defined by a system of law. All right, and so that's kind of the premise for Hebrews chapter 11, just to get things going a little bit. In most cases, what people are doing is they're looking at Hebrews chapter 11 as just simply a list of examples, a list of examples of faith, and it's referred to as the hall of faith is a way to describe it. And I think that's okay. I don't want to take that away from people. But what people are thinking is they're thinking of these things, these descriptions, as examples that perhaps we are to follow, that we are to be the same kind of examples. And I'm not willing to go that far to say that our response must be something worthy of documenting. I don't share in that particular belief or that persuasion that there needs to be something in your life that is worthy of adding to Hebrews chapter 11, which some people may try to do. All right, and so that's okay to look at these things as examples, and that's fine. But first and foremost, we want to identify that there is a response to the truth, and through this there is a testimony of our God, and through that, through God's participation, there's also a testimony of God for us, that He will testify of us in addition to us testifying of Him. And so through our response, we will be a participant. Through God's response, He also is a participant in our lives. And so I'm going to be moving forward, keeping that in mind, that we're looking for examples of people responding to the truth that's revealed to them. But in addition to that, what we have going on from verse 8 is we have the introduction of what I think is an additional theme And that theme is that we are a part of something greater. That is not just about ourselves, is not just about our lives, is not just about our testimony, but that we are really a part of something bigger. Okay, and that becomes the next step. First, define faith, speak of it as a testimony. God testifies, there's mutual participation. And then beyond that, that we are really a part of something bigger. Okay, that's what I'll be getting into from chapter 11, verse 8. Now, please try to remember also that the people who this letter was written to, the people who this letter was being written to, these people were not mature in the faith. They had not likely been in the faith for very long, most of the people. If you consider what was written, then I think it's reasonable to consider that the majority of the people who were expected to be the audience were not quite mature in the faith, and that this is a way of encouraging them to mature and to grow. But in addition to that, you have to remember that the culture was very religious. Religious in the sense that people were committed, they were devoted to a life of repentance and obedience. That's what I would describe as religious, a system of bondage, that the people were very much devoted to their system of repentance and obedience, and their observance, this would be defined as their observance of, in this case, the Mosaic law. Now, through their observance of the Mosaic law, it's important to remember, right, that you don't need to have faith to be a part of that. And that's something that the people would have had to wrestle with, that they would have had to deal with, is that here in chapter 11, the writer is speaking about faith, whereas beforehand, faith was not really important. Faith was not necessary. It was not really a part of a person's life. It could be, but it didn't have to be. What I mean by that is that for those who observed the Mosaic law, no faith is required. All right? Let me say that again, because I know that might sound a little awkward. To be a person who observes the Mosaic law, no faith is required. Now, a person can have lots of faith and live in observance to the Mosaic law. There's plenty of room for that, but it's not necessary. All you have to do in order to be a good Jew is to do what you're supposed to do and don't do those things that you're not supposed to do. You don't have to have faith. You just have to obey, all right? That's all you have to do. Just follow the directions, follow the instructions. Nobody cares what you really believe, just as long as you do those things that are right and don't do those things that are wrong, just as long as you obey, just as long as you participate in the ceremonial activities, whatever it is. There's no reason to have any faith. Your response can simply be, you want to be a part of the community? This is what you do. This is what you don't do. And if you violate these instructions, then we just simply won't have you a part of the community anymore. That's how people usually address this. And so if you have a person who has faith, who has substantial faith, then that would be considered to be a little extra. You know, that would be considered to be a little unique, maybe. I know this might sound a little awkward, all right, but if it does, it's probably because you just need to get out and spend time with a lot of other people as soon as you're able. But I have found this to be the case. I have found an abundance of people that even today, I can say it's the same thing. There are lots of religious systems. There are lots of religious congregations, lots of churches, the synagogues, all of these people, all these groups that are available. There's plenty of them out of all of them that are filled with people who are not really people of faith, okay? And you know, I know that might sound a little surprising for some of you. It was surprising for me. You know, when I first left the synagogue and went into the Christian world, I had some expectations. I did. I had some expectations. I thought, because my understanding of Christianity was mainly identified through my study of the Scriptures, and through some of the people who I interacted with who identified themselves as Christians. It was a while before I went into the Christian world and thought, well, I guess I'm going to go to church. I'm going to try that. We'll see what that's like. I remember when I was much younger. One time I was driving down the road in my truck and somebody was with me, and I pointed to a really nice looking church building, and I said, one day I'm going to find out what's going on in places like that. This person looked at me like I was crazy or something. Reasonably so, I suppose. But I went into the Christian world and I discovered that my expectations were a little unrealistic. That most of the people who were there in the first place that I went, and the second place, most of the people, they really weren't people of faith. They were there for other reasons, and I suppose that's okay, but it was just a little surprising for me that it wasn't really about that they certainly went through the rituals, they went through the ceremonies, they sang the songs, they talked the talk, they walked the walk, they volunteered, they participated in lots of activities, they were involved. It was a nice community of people, really nice people. But not all of them, only a small handful, would be considered to be people of faith in the sense that they really incorporated the truth of God in their lives in a personal way and in a way that was beyond their time that they were spending with the congregation. All right, and so the writer is writing to a people who were accustomed to just simply following the instructions of the law, that their understanding of their relationship with God, if there was one at all, but that their relationship with society was mainly about just follow the directions, do what you're supposed to do, and don't do these kinds of things that you're not supposed to do, and that's it. All right, and even today, like I said, in many places, in many congregations of people, circles of influence, you can do that. You can get away with that. It's much more difficult to be like this in a smaller group setting. In a smaller group setting, it's much harder to hide if you're not really a person of faith. If you're just a religious person who enjoys the religious activity, you need to be in a larger group of people, in a group of people where it's easier to hide, and it's also easier to find other people like you who are not really there because they care too much about God. That's not really what they're there for, and you can find people that you can have very good relationships with in that sense in a larger group setting. But in a smaller group setting, it's much more difficult for people to hide. It's one of the reasons why it's easier to find a larger group of people than it is to find and sustain and maintain a smaller group of people. All right? It really is about numbers and the fact that the overwhelming majority of people are just not really interested in something beyond being a part of a community. Okay? So the writer is writing to these folks, and he is adding the subject of faith to their lives for the most part. Now, like I said, there's always exceptions and a minority. But for the most part, I want you to think about this from that perspective, that he's had a lot to say between chapters 1 and 10. But now, beyond chapter 10, we're going to move into a much more involved topic of not just resting in the complete forgiveness of sins, realizing that there is an inheritance in Christ from chapter 9, that we are to live with what we have received in Christ, but now that there's something called faith, and that it is a response to the truth that is beyond just obedience to the commandments. That we now have a new covenant, a new priest, a new everything. And what is new also is faith. Faith is also a new thing, right? It's new in the sense that there is a heartfelt thing. There is something of genuine quality within a person such that they are going to engage in a relationship with God instead of just simply participating in the right activities. But that this is something that's going to be extra, right? And so he speaks of people in the past as examples that these are people who also lived according to faith, that was a part of who they were. And so it's in effect, it's inviting the Hebrews, the Jews, it's inviting them to understand that there is a lot more to the new covenant than just what they're thinking in terms of being set free from the old, or maybe there's part of the old still part of it. What is it that we do now that we didn't do before? There's a lot more to it than that. There is something called just simply responding and letting your life be a genuine reflection of the truth that is revealed, and that is not necessarily going to be described or quantified or defined by a specific commandment. All right? That there's more to life than just following the instructions, following the directions. There's a lot more to life than just that. And he gives examples of people who proceeded with this. In addition to that, when making the transition, when people are making the transition from the temple in Jerusalem to recognizing that they are a part of the temple in heaven, when the writer speaks about those things in the previous chapters, what he does is he sets the stage, he establishes the groundwork for what's presented here in chapter 11 to emphasize more that you are a part of something greater. Beforehand, their identity and what they thought that they were a part of was highly connected to the temple in Jerusalem. In fact, if you're going to observe the Mosaic law like you are expected to, like you are required to, if you're going to observe it as is required and defined by the law, you need to be in the nation, in the land of Israel. You've got to be there. You've got to be there. You've got to have access to Jerusalem at least 3 times a year. All right, you've got to have a Levitical priesthood. There's a lot that you need. It's all connected to the land. That was what the Old Covenant was established for. It was established in order to define the rules by which people would live their lives, govern their lives while they were together there in the land. All right? And so the people were highly connected to the geography. They were highly connected to the temple that was built there. When the writer speaks of another temple and that Jesus didn't go into that temple and place his blood over there, he went into the real tabernacle of God. That's where he went. All of this was to help the people to understand that they are a part of something greater than what they were seeing there. And so this is the next theme that is presented in chapter 11. The first theme has to do with being a testimony of God and him being a testimony of you. And the second theme is to emphasize the point that you are a part of something greater, a part of something much greater. All right? So let me go ahead and review a little bit from chapter 11, verses 1 through 7. Verses 1 through 7, we have, let me start out in verse 4, we have Abel, who was a testimony of the fact that our God wants us to recognize that our right standing with him is not going to be based on our obedience and repentance, and that Abel testified of that. And in his own life, he experienced a relationship with his God for as long as he was alive, on that basis, that he was able to be at peace in his own heart and in his own life until Cain murdered him. Enoch, he walked with God. That was something that he got to enjoy. He was a testimony of God in the sense that he walked with him. And then he lived his life and he was gone. He was not recognized as being someone who was a part of something that was much greater. He wasn't thinking of himself as being a part of something greater. Same thing with Noah. He was just about surviving the flood, and it was about his life and about his time and whether or not he was going to be the one who survived what was coming. Going into verse 8. In verse 8, we have the beginning of this transition where it says, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. All right, so here we have Abraham going out to another place. He is responding to God instructing him or telling him to go out to another place, that God would give him another area of land, a place that he could dwell and call his own. So God communicated with Abraham in a way that Abraham was not uncertain. He was not confused. He was not unaware. He was certain enough that he would go. It's a good opportunity to remind you that we do not have a God who has a communication problem. He does not have a communication problem. He's very capable of communicating effectively with us, and that if we are not sure, if we are uncertain about anything that maybe he has said or not said, if we're unsure about that, we can just simply take the position and make the assumption, I think it's reasonable, that we have a God who does not have a communication problem, and that if we're unsure, then we should just go ahead and assume that nothing has really been said, and then proceed. All right. So, but with Abraham, he was definitely sure that God shared this with him. We don't have the details in terms of how this was conveyed, but it was conveyed. Abraham responded to the truth, and he recognized that it was something that he would personally benefit from. But there was more to it than just that. There was also the understanding that he was going to be a part of something greater that would be beyond his own life. In verse 9, by faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. He never saw that. He never saw that personally, but he knew that this would be something that would take place, that would happen at some point. And because of that, he could say that he was a part of something greater than just his own life. He would not be the only occupant in that particular city. And his family at that time was relatively small, not big enough in order to fill a city whose foundation is of God. And so dwelling in tents was perfectly reasonable and understandable, and Abraham could do what he was able to do, but recognizing that if there was going to be something greater, it would be something that God would do. It was something bigger than just him, and that it would quite likely take many generations for something like that to occur. In verse 11, the writer speaks a little bit about Sarah. By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore, which had occurred definitely by the time that this was being written many times over. Now, in verse 11, I'm not so sure where the writer is getting this from. Because when I read the historical record about Sarah, I don't know. It looks to me like a lot of the things that she said gave the indication that that she was quite uncertain about what was going to take place, and whether or not she was she was genuinely believing and trusting before she found herself with child. I don't know. We don't have enough information, and so I'm just going to mention that and say that it sounds really good, but I'm not certain where the writer is getting this from. If this is true, if there are ways that this could be considered to be true, it would have had to have been a divine revelation for this person themselves. All right, let me move forward into verse 13. In verse 13, we have the continuation, the building up of this theme that we are a part of something much greater than just ourselves. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. All right? Now, that's a different perspective. That's a different point of view. To consider yourself to be a temporary resident. All right? Now, this is a transition, because for the most part, the Jew, the thought of the Jew, the mind of the Jew, as was encouraged and promoted by the law, was that you're going to obey your God for your own personal benefit during your time here on earth. That's the incentive. The incentive has to do with you and what you get from God because you observe the commandments, because you obey God, because you don't sin, that sort of thing. That the emphasis, for the most part, from a religious perspective, the emphasis is to say that this is something that you do so that you experience a personal benefit while you are physically alive. It's all about you and your life right now. That's what this is all about. That's the perspective that a lot of people would have. And today we've got an abundance of people like that now as well. That's not unusual, that people are really just thinking about, well, I'm alive right now. This is my life, and I think I'm going to be alive for longer than I care to think about right now. And so the only thing that really matters is me and what's going on with me and what is mine and what is it that I have and what is it that I'm going to be able to hold on to and what is it that I'm going to get soon from God. That it's all about this temporary existence for the most part. People are thinking, if I can just have the kind of health that I want to have, if I can just have the kind of prosperity that I want to have, if I can just have the kinds of people in my life who I want to have in my life. All right? This is all about the temporary stuff. But here, between verses 13 and 16, we have an initial description of saying, you're a part of something bigger. And that it's not just about you, and it's not just about your life and what's going on in your existence, that you really are a part of something bigger. You're a part of something greater, and that you really are not going to be here for very long, that you really are here in a temporary way. That this is just going to be a very short period of time, and you're here for that short period of time, but that you are a part of something bigger and that will last beyond your lifetime. All right? And that's hard to embrace when you are consumed with the law, When you're consumed with the law, it's all about you. It's all about you. It's all about what you get. It's all about your blessings. It's all about what rewards you may get, promises, interventions, that kind of thing. It's all about you, and you don't really get much of an opportunity to think about what happens after you, or what part are you playing in the greater scheme of things. What about the fact that, there's another person working with you as well? This is God. What about him? What about him? It's not just a temporary existence. And so when we recognize that there is something beyond this life, and it's also not just about you going into heaven and having your reserved area for yourself that you get to rule over and live in. It's not just about that. You are a part of something much bigger. And when you see that, you will realize that you really are just a temporary resident here. You are a pilgrim in a sense. You're not going to be here forever. Right? That by definition, you are temporary. And no matter how hard you may work to try and establish permanency here, it's not going to work. You are going to leave. You're not going to be here in the near future. All right? You're just simply not going to be here. And I know that can be a struggle for some people, but that's don't worry. We'll just wait a little while longer and you'll figure it out. So again, from verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them. Right? So they had not received the promises. Well, we don't know exactly what promises they may have been thinking of, or they may have been relying on, or that they may have well understood. I think that the biggest promise, the most important one, is the promise of the Messiah. And that what they were doing was being a part of establishing the groundwork and the foundation for the coming of the Messiah. That first and foremost. For Abraham, for the foundation of a city. Like I said, there were not enough people to fill that place yet. So even if God had built a wonderful city there in that area, who would occupy it? Who would be? Are we gonna bring in the locals? The local people who God wants to evict from this area? Is that what we're gonna do? We're gonna move them into this space. You're gonna have a big city with nobody in it. So there's the promise that eventually there will be many, and that's going to take many generations. Clearly, Abraham is not going to be alive to see it. Right? They were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. All right? By default, by recognizing that you are here on a temporary basis, by recognizing that, you're also testifying and you're proclaiming, in a sense, that you are seeking for something that is permanent. All right? Do you expect to just be a temporary person throughout the entire universe and throughout your eternal existence? That's just simply your role in life, to never, ever have a home? I don't think so. That's not. We were constructed, our God designed us to be an eternal being and to have an eternal place of peace and to be able to enjoy that and live that way. And we will have one. That's the kingdom of heaven. That's the kingdom of heaven. Our God will provide us with a place, with a homeland, with a home. And in that eternal state, when we are able to let go of this flesh that is not going to be alive forever, when we let go of this and we are recreated into a new creation after that, and we're given a new body and a new place, then we will experience that later. And we know that that's going to take place because this is something that he told us through the Lord Jesus. And so it's something that we can genuinely rely on. Okay, again in verse 14, for those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland, just by default of saying, I'm not going to be here forever. I'm going to be dead soon. I'm old. It's going to happen. It's a way of saying plainly, I am not going to be here forever, but that I do expect that there is a place where I will be forever. I am seeking a home. I am seeking a homeland. My God has promised that he will provide that for me, and I'm just simply waiting until I get there. But while I am here, I am still a part of something greater than just my own personal life. We are a part of something greater. Our God is actively involved in this world and in this life and in our lives, and he has invited us to be a participant of something greater than ourselves. Verse 15, and truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had an opportunity to return. If you would have thought about it, they could have always just gone back to the way that their life was. And you can do that too, right? I mean, you think about what your life was like before, as an example, before you came to Christ. Would you like to go back to that? I mean, would you? If you would like to go back to that, I would say it's probably because you've not been in the new life for very long, or you may have considered yourself to be in the new life for a long time, but you've never even understood the real nature of the gospel and the covenant and the inheritance that you have. Once you live in the inheritance that you have, once you live with your God, once you grow in the faith, once you grow in Christ, once you grow to know him as a person, there's no way you can ever go back. And when these thoughts come to mind of what life was like before, it's not something that's worthy of even thinking of and entertaining. Certainly not for long, in comparison. When this happens in a person is unique to the person. When this transition happens. Like I said, I personally think that it really happens when a person genuinely understands and they embrace and they live in accordance with the new covenant that God has established. That once that is real for them, then there just simply is no going back. Okay, again in verse 15, and truly if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Right? Once you make that transition, then it's not a transition to just live our life now and say that that's the end, but it's also a part of that is an understanding and a recognition and a reality that we know that there is something that is coming later. Okay? And so it's a way of saying, look, you folks, you are a part of something much bigger than your own personal life. Okay? Now, in addition to all of this, you can spend a lot of time thinking about, well, how is it that you feel about this? And what is your perspective? And what is your understanding? We can spend a lot of time, talking about that and how are you finding peace and are you recognizing your temporary existence and holding on to your eternal one, that sort of thing. But we've got to remember that you are not the only person involved in this situation, all right? You're not the only person. To say that you are a part of something bigger, is nice, and we can embrace that. But in order to really recognize that, a good place to start is not to think about all the other people, but instead, if you can, try first to think about your God. All right? And sometimes this can be a challenge. Normally we're thinking, well, I'm a part of something bigger. That means I'm a part of other generations, other people. what's going to happen next. With Abraham, you could say, I'm a part of something greater. I'm the beginning of a whole new nation. The number of people will be greater than the sand on the seashore, that sort of thing, which is fine. But you're thinking about other people, and this is good, but it's not all there is to it. When we think about the work that we're doing right now, for myself, for example, the work that I do, ministerially speaking, a lot of it is stuff that is going to just simply go away. And most of that is on an individual basis. I'm discipling other individuals. I'm giving counsel to other individuals, or just simply asking a brief question and helping people get some clarity or understanding on something on these individuals. That's great for them, but this is not something that's going to last. They are going to live their life, and they're going to die, and they're going to be somewhere else, just as I am. In order to do something that may be of use, of a part, to be a part of what's going to happen in the following generations, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 300 years from now, what is it that I'm doing in order to try to be a part of something greater from that perspective? I try to teach the teachings that I'm doing through radio and now through video. I build an archive, and I try to do this in a way that I expect that people will use this material long after I am gone. And there's a lot of material that I've done in the past that I would like to redo, that I could do a better job with. And some of those things I've been able to replace. Some of those things I've started and not quite finished. Other things I'd certainly like to do. And if I can, I will, as I'm able. So, for me, certainly there is a lot of individual stuff that I can be a part of, but there is something greater than that, and that's what's going to happen in the following generations. And what can I do now in order to build that? And there are many things that I would like to do that I don't think I'll be able to live long enough in order to accomplish. It just depends on how life may change. All right, but as I pursue these things, and it is being a part of something greater, it's easy to forget. All right, it's easy to forget about God, about Him. So we may try to think in terms of the numbers of people and forget or ignore or neglect the one person who is probably of greater importance than us all, and that's God Himself. All right? It can be very easy for us to start measuring the quality or the effectiveness of our participation by the volume of people, by the numbers of people, instead of remembering the importance of the one person, our God Himself. And here in chapter 11 and verse 16, the writer mentions something about this, that you are a part of something greater, and to remember that your God, your God, He is certainly much greater than all right? And what are His feelings about this? And what does He see about this? And what He thinks and how He feels does have importance. All right? It really does have importance. And are you going to be a part of something greater in terms of He who is greater than all? And here the word that he uses is ashamed. That God is not ashamed. Now you could say the other way around. You could say that God could be ashamed. Let me give you an example, all right? Some of you can probably relate to this, where you may have someone who's somewhat close to you, and this person lives only for themselves. All right? You probably can think of somebody who's in your life. If you don't have somebody in your life, then I will now exercise sin by being envious. Okay? But so don't tell me, if you don't. But but everybody, I think it's reasonable to say that everybody's got someone in their life who only lives for themselves, that their existence is only about themselves, and that you are probably enabling them to do this. You probably are participating in their lives such that you are providing them with food, shelter, electricity, heat, maybe a little cooling air conditioning when it gets too hot, stuff like that. You're providing them with water to drink. There's probably something that you are doing in terms of taking care of them and enabling them to only think about themselves. And if it wasn't for you, if you weren't doing this for them, then they would have to think about somebody else, because they would have to provide something of value to someone else to get something of value in return. That there would be a mutual relationship of some kind. There's be some measure of equality, in that sense, some measure of equality, that there's equal participation in a way that both people approve, not just, well, this is my role in your life, and you should recognize this as being my equitable part in this relationship. And you can say, well, I don't feel that way. In fact, I just assumed that we not have anything to do with each other at all, if that's how you want to define it. So you have to understand that everybody has feelings concerning these things, and you can't just impose your feelings, your beliefs on some other person and expect things to work out, at least for the long term. All right, but that if you have a person who's in your life and they are not a part of anything greater than themselves, all right, they don't contribute anything to society, to civilization, to anybody's life except to cause pain and suffering, all right, for the most part. If that's the case, then you probably could feel a sense of shame due to your connection with them. You might feel ashamed, I'm ashamed that I'm a part of enabling this person to be like this, that this is what they're like, and I work, I labor, I sweat, I suffer, a part of my life is taken away from me or that I give away, and this is what we get. We get this. And that is an expression of shame. All right, now I'm asking you this, if you have somebody in your life who you can relate to in this way, all right, and again, I want to add that this person is doing nothing in order to become a person who will be a contributing member of society, a part of something greater than just themselves. I understand small children, they're learning how to do that kind of thing, or at least we would expect them to be learning how to be a part of something greater than themselves. All right, but I'm asking you to think about these things because it's probable that you have someone in your life who you can relate to in this way. And if you can understand this, all right, if you can feel any sense of shame for your role, all right, for the fact that you are in this person's life, for the fact that you're connected with them in some respect, that there's some kind of relationship that exists between you and them, then maybe you can appreciate verse 16 and the fact that God may experience some sense of shame for those who are called by his name. All right, that he has feelings and he might feel ashamed. If you were to go to God, right? If you were to go to him later on, and you probably know a few people who live in a way that they are only existing for themselves. That's their only existence. They refuse to be a part of anything that is greater than themselves. And they consider themselves to be children of God. They do. They consider themselves to be people of God, and that God has a place for them in heaven, that sort of thing. And let's say you go to God before they do. And you go to them. You go to him. And in your conversation with him, getting used to each other, that sort of thing, you ask him, so tell me about these other people who are just not a part of anything that you're doing. All right? Let me mention that again. If you were to ask God, tell me, how do you feel about these people who claim to be your children and who claim that you are their God, but they're not a part of anything that you're doing? They're just not. They just live for themselves. They're not a part of. How do you feel about that, God? And he might very well reply with what's indicated here in verse 16. Well, I feel kind of ashamed. I feel a little bit ashamed. I'm ashamed that these people are connected with me in any way whatsoever, that they're identified with me. I'm ashamed that they think of me as their God. That bothers me, that they're not a part of anything that is greater than themselves. They refuse to be a part of anything that is greater than themselves. They only think about themselves relentlessly. I know, because I hear their prayers all the time, and their prayers are just all about things for themselves, And so now that you brought it up, I do feel a little ashamed. If you wouldn't bring it up, I could just pretend it wasn't happening, and I wouldn't have to feel ashamed. Maybe something to that effect, right? I'm only saying this to try to encourage you to think a little bit about God as a person, and that God has feelings as well, and that he would be willing to endure such shame as part of what he's doing, as part of what he's doing as a whole. That I'm sure he would be willing to accommodate that and embrace that and say, yes, some of my people are involved in things that I'm doing, other people are not. And I got some shame, but I got some good feelings too about other things. And that is just part of being who he is. And it's part of doing what he's doing. It's a part of the greater scope of things. Again in verse 16, but now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Right? He's not ashamed of you. He's not ashamed of you calling him your God. He's not ashamed of that. If you want to call him your God, he's not going to be ashamed. As long as you recognize, that he has something greater for you, that he has another home for you, that you are a part of something bigger than just yourself and your own life, that you are a part of his life also, that you are a part of what he is doing also. He won't be ashamed that you are calling him your God, if that's the case. And if somebody goes and asks him, an angel, or maybe the devil himself, somebody goes and asks him, well, so-and-so is saying that you're their God, but I don't see their life really being a part of being anything more than just a life of them being consumed with themselves. I don't see that. So how do you feel about that, God? Huh? How do you feel about that? And he could say, yeah, that's pretty shameful. I feel ashamed that they would identify themselves with me. I don't really want to be a part of that. All right? And that's what's indicated here in order to speak to the Hebrews, all right? To speak to the Jews and to tell them, look, there is a lot more here than just following the directions of the law. There's a lot more here than just being a part of the temple, right? There's a lot more here than just, there's a lot more going on here than just doing what's right and doing what's wrong and expecting to be blessed or cursed one way or the other. There's a lot more. In the new covenant, we have a new life, a new relationship, a new everything. All right? And this is a part of it, where we can have a relational experience with our God such that, yes, he may feel shame or he may not be ashamed. And it's not a big deal just to recognize that you're not going to be here forever and you have another home, all right? That's all that this is. Just to recognize that he's not going to be ashamed. Okay? It's not as if there's now a new set of laws to say, well, folks, we got to make sure that you are definitively a part of something greater than yourself in a way that I personally will evaluate and say is okay, and then you can say that God is not ashamed of you. We don't want to get into something like that at all. All right, but I do want to emphasize this because it is well written in verse 16. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 16, that our God has feelings about this, and he wants us to be a part of what he is doing, to be a part of something greater than just ourselves and our own lives, but to be thinking in terms of what we are doing generationally and what we are doing as a part of building his kingdom, not just of ourselves, but also others. Okay? So that's what I wanted to share with you this morning concerning Hebrews chapter 11, verses 8 through 16. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 8 through 16. I got a couple of questions for you this morning that you guys can use in your small groups if you'd like to. The question is, in what ways are you a part of what is greater than you? In what ways are you a part of what is greater than you? All right, it's a question just to ask. In what ways would you say that you're a part of something greater than just yourself? Now, if you cannot think of anything, no one is allowed to condemn this person. All right, if they can't think of anything, you don't condemn this person. That's not the right way to respond to this, and you should not feel condemned if you do not have an answer for this. All right, it could just very well be what is going on in your life presently. All right, there's no reason for condemnation. I'm just asking the question because there's some of us who can answer that question. And a person should not be ashamed to answer that question with conviction, and you should not be ashamed if you cannot answer that question. But through answering that question, we're able to testify that there really are things that are greater than ourselves. And it's okay to recognize those things, to speak of those things, to testify of those things, because it is the reality of the life that we have. All right, now there's another question, and that's, if you don't know what your part may be right now, there could be something in the past. All right, fine, that you could mention that you feel was something that your God allowed you to be a part of, that he wanted you to be a part of. But if there isn't anything, here's the next question. What would you like to be a part of? What would you like to do? What would you like to be? In what ways would you like to be a part of something greater than yourself? All right, and I'm gonna tell you that I personally feel that if your God does not give you direct instruction to do those things that you would like to do, that would be good, right? They would be good, and that they would contribute, that they would be a part of those things. And if your God does not give you instructions, if it's something that you would like to do, I think it would be fantastic for you to do those things, all right? And to not be insecure about it, to not be ashamed about it, that it's good to pursue these kinds of things on your own. And if the Lord may speak to you otherwise, then so be it. And if he doesn't, so be it. But that he gives people a lot of freedom and a lot of flexibility. And if he has not given you something specific, he has left it open-ended for you to decide and for you to pick and for you to choose whatever your heart desires, with the expectation that your heart is being changed, through your relationship with him otherwise. Okay? So the first question is, in what ways are you a part of something that is greater than you, of what is greater than you? And if you are not, how would you like to be? How would you like to be a part of something that is greater than yourself that God is doing? And if there's something you'd like to do it, then by all means do it. by all means pursue it. You know, don't feel shy about that at all. Like I said, our God does not have a communication problem. If He speaks to a person directly or indirectly, and lets them know that this is something that He wants them to do, good for them. You know, but if He doesn't, that doesn't mean that He doesn't want anybody to do anything. All right, doesn't mean that at all. And I don't believe that a person should be shy about that in any way whatsoever. Okay, so thank you for spending this time with me this morning. For those of you who are with me live, looks like we got a handful of people who are viewing live this morning. And for those of you who are viewing later, I just, I appreciate that this is being used and it's useful to you. I really do. Thank you for that, and I will be back next week. Okay, I'll be online for a little while still to answer any questions that you might have. Sorry if I didn't seem too enthusiastic this morning. I'm just a little tired. It's just the time of year where there's a lot of extra things to do, and I have a lot on my mind, and I don't have as much energy because it's been spent doing other stuff. But I should feel better. Not next week. I'm still going to be a little rough, but by the end of the month, I should be a little bit more rested and ready to go. Okay, thank you.